The Ajax mine is a proposed open-pit gold and copper mine that would be situated at the southern limits to the city of Kamloops, BC. The mine is proposed by KGHM International, a subsidiary to a Polish multinational that has its headquarters right here in Canada's mining headquarters, Vancouver. The project would bring 1,800 construction jobs and then 500 full-time mining jobs once completed. But if you feel like you're having a case of deja vu, well, you might be, because this mine has been proposed and pushed for by advocates for several years now, and what is becoming a typically Canadian experience, well, we still haven't got it built yet. Opposition to the project is coming in from several different places, as you might expect. Foreign-funded activist groups are, of course, chiming in, and so is the perpetual activist class of First Nations. But sadly, so did the city of Kamloops. This week, the city voted against supporting the project, 4 votes to 2. Those opposed said that they were concerned over the environmental impacts, with one councillor quoted as saying, "Sometimes prosperity just isn't worth it," unquote. But isn't that a typical response of a politician? Because politicians are so rarely the kinds of people hurting for employment opportunities or upward mobility in their careers. 500 jobs is nothing to sneeze at, and neither is the agreement that would see a yearly benefit of $3.8 million for the city of Kamloops should the mine get up and running. This mine needs to be built for a number of reasons, but none more important than continuing some form of economic activity in a province destined for a slowdown under the NDP Green hard left government that was just sworn in this week. And this is not really the same BC NDP of the 1990s when they approved 6 different mine openings, and back when they actually had strong labor interests within the party. No, today's NDP is much more under the thumb of big green environmental activism, not only in the form of the support of the Green Party and Andrew Weaver, but also their activist donor base is much more aligned with the LEAP manifesto wing of the party than the blue-collar wing, or whatever is left of it. One city councillor who voted in favor of the mine was Pat Wallace, and she told CBC, quote, "To me, Ajax is an opportunity to strengthen our economic future in terms of investment in our community, local businesses, and employment. I'm confident the environmental assessment process is thorough and comprehensive," unquote. And while I am thrilled Pat Wallace has her head on straight, at the end of the day, this vote was merely symbolic and just another example of local civic politicians sticking their noses into something they have no real say over. It will be the federal government who has the final say whether this Ajax mine is approved. This reminds me so much of the kind of activism being perpetuated at both Vancouver and Burnaby City Halls, where mayors Gregor Robertson and Derek Corrigan both have spent hundreds of thousands of tax dollars to oppose the Trans Mountain Pipeline project, a project that is of national importance, I will remind you. Because, well, they know that this is a winner for their tiny echo chamber of activists in civic politics. First Nations are often the biggest beneficiaries of economic opportunities and resource development. So, of course, the activist class of First Nations oppose this project. A local First Nation led their own environmental assessment, if you can even call it that, and are opposing the project because, according to band councillor Janet Jules, quote, "The current environmental approval process in British Columbia and Canada uses science, but doesn't take into consideration our traditions and our culture," unquote. Jules also told CBC that the land near Jayco Lake, where the mine is proposed, holds great spiritual and cultural value for the First Nation. Look, I want to be respectful to our First Nations, especially in BC where we haven't had many treaties over the years, but that kind of commentary is just ridiculous. We all live here together, and it's time to treat this province and country as all of ours. First Nations, first generation, second generation, new immigrant. This country needs to work for all of us and all of our prosperity. No more holding the country or province hostage because of spiritual beliefs. During his time running for leader of the Conservative Party, Kevin O'Leary had one position that always stood out and appealed to me. His idea that Canada's natural resource industry needs to be unbridled and that provinces need to be coerced into actions that will stimulate economic growth. I couldn't agree more. Canada and BC are doomed if we don't keep our rate of economic growth north of 3%. And frankly, maybe closer to 4 or 5% in BC if we want to keep up with the ever-increasing cost of living, the ever-increasing dependency ratio, and the very clear and real threat of the aggressive economic policies of the Trump administration in the US. If we don't change our economic act quickly, that could be very painful. With economic uncertainties, of course, also across the world, resource development and precious metals could be tremendously important should any instability break out. So, Canada, BC, and Kamloops, let's stop the civic political posturing, the over-the-top claims from First Nation activists who don't represent the working men and women of their communities, and let's build this mine. For the Rebel.media, I'm Christopher Wilson. I had a quick peek at spearkids.com this morning, and we have raised over $215,000 because of patriots like you. If you haven't chipped in yet, or even if you have and you could spare a little extra, go back to spearkids.com, chip in a little bit of money for the victims of Omar Khadr's terrorism.